This is my thing that I've come to learn about these people. They have what I like to call broken thinking. And
this is also a Richardism. Richard always goes, it's something I like to call this.
It's seriously.
That one might be one of the best. It's this little thing I like to call your brain's fucking broken. It's just a little thing. I've noticed it with a few people, but your brain is broken.
It's not that your brain is broken. It's you have broken thinking. And what broken thinking is to me is when you do not understand this one particular line of thinking called logical fallacies. Logical fallacies are patterns of incorrect thinking versus correct thinking versus incorrect thinking. Like, for example, if you go out and try to find a truth about something that you want to find, that is called cognitive bias. You have a bias because you want to prove that it is correct. And then every time that it is proven incorrect to you, due to this thing called cognitive dissonance, you then have a stronger truth. So the more that people try to tell you you're wrong or it's incorrect or there's evidence of it being wrong or incorrect, the more you deeply believe it to be true. We can see this most drastically applied in like the vaccine movement, where, in 1998, there was a paper that was published linking autism and vaccine. In 2000, it was retracted because it turned out to be completely fraudulent, like totally made up data, like the guy got his license stripped from him. And even still to this day, people want to believe that vaccines are bad, vaccines cause autism. And the more data and the more studies and the more information that comes out over and over and over and over again about how safe and efficacy and like positive and good vaccines are for all of humanity, these individuals have this broken thinking that forces them to believe what they believe even more and deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think, for me, for example, I learned about logical fallacies when I started to remove myself from religion. My whole life I was a Christian and grew up in the Christian area, did the youth group, did the church, did the whole thing. And then the more I tried to learn about God and the more I went on this spiritual journey, the more non-answers I got. The more I got hit these dead ends everywhere. And I was like, why can't I find one answer? I need an answer. So I would then go to
Well, also this was after your injury too, is like after your injury, you also were starting to realize like all these things that people would say. And you're like, no.
Well, I wanted to find meaning and purpose in my injury.
Yeah.
So I was seeking.
Yeah. Like God did this to me for a reason or whatever.
Exactly. I was seeking to try to find answers within spirituality and religion. And then I was like, okay, let me see what they have to say in Judaism. Let me see what they have to say in Islam. Let me see what they have to say, in Buddhism. And the more and more I looked, I was like, what the fuck is going on? And then finally I found this guy named Matt Dillahunty, who runs this cool show on public access TV in Texas called The Atheist Experience. And then he would have like live on-air debates with people who would come to him with, reasons why they thought God was real, yada, yada, whatever. And then like he just started he would just constantly debunk what they were saying to the point where they would get angry and hang up. Like just nonstop, they would just get angry and hang up. And I'm like,
yeah.
And I'm like, this is interesting because although I'm a Christian and I'm trying to find a reason to believe in God, like I'm agreeing with everything this guy's saying. So I'm like, wait a minute, am I not a Christian though? And then I learned about like science and the scientific method and peer-reviewed scientific journals and what it takes in order to get into a peer-reviewed scientific journal is like you have to not only try to disprove your methods as much as possible, you hand it off to a group of strangers and they try to disprove it as much as possible. And if they do disprove it, then you don't get in the journal. So it's like I then realized I'm like, oh, I've got broken thinking. And then once I realized that my thinking was broken, I was like, okay, let me readjust. And then like my eyes were just open to everything. I was like, holy shit. And then I started listening to this really cool podcast called Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, which was really just like a group of three brothers that were all just really smart people,
questioning,
and very high and very qualified, and would just question everything from homeopathy to pseudoscience to crystals to psychics to religion to, I mean, just everything. They would just constantly have conversations about it, and I was like, oh, I get it now. It's not, I just was thinking wrong. I didn't know how to think. It was broken thinking. And I think a lot of people are victims of their own broken thinking, and they just don't know. You don't know that you don't know. Like, and especially when you're surrounded by other people that also have broken thinking that can confirm all these beliefs that you have. You know, and I think that goes into, you know, crystals. I think that goes into psychics. I think that goes into religion. I think that goes into literally anything. And a lot of it is like you briefly mentioned, like placebo. Like, is it working because you want it to work? I mean, I think about astrology and horoscopes. Like,
you are jumping around a lot, and I have like 9 things to talk about.
I know.
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
So, okay. So one thing I want to touch back on.
I was totally on a rant right there.
Yeah. I was just letting you go, and I was like, he talked about 3 things. I want to talk about all 3 of them. And then you're like, then horoscopes. I'm like, God damn it, I got to jump in here. Okay.
Did you make notes?
No, I got them in my head. So, first thing I want to talk about, to back up a little bit with the crystals and stuff, and also with religion, is I think a lot of people find comfort in finding answers. Like you said, they're looking for answers, but they're not looking for reasons why those answers might be wrong necessarily. So if they just like hear something and it kind of makes sense, you just like find those pathways where you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You know,
you try to find a reason for it to be
right. So
like,
for example, you know, people get into the church because they're like, oh, my life is like going downhill, and then they like might go to a church service, and then they like start to feel good because they sit in church, and then they find community, and like there's all these snowballing effects of like going to church and hanging out with Christians and good people that make your life better, minus the actual like teachings and Bible. Like those are just good things for your life. Community,
sense of belonging.
Exactly. And I think like, for example, you know, you could get into, for example, yoga. You know, I am someone who goes to yoga a lot, and like I can see how a lot of people will, you know, go to yoga and then they go into either like the Buddhism side or the spirituality side, where, and that's another weird thing about the whole crystal woo-woo type thing, is there's not really like a specific name for it because there's so many levels to it, and there's not like a specific religion to it. So it's very hard to just pinpoint and be like, that's bullshit, because, but they're like, oh, well, I don't believe in that, I just believe in this. And it's very pick and choose.
I remember in the early 2000s, late 90s, when yoga was on the rise, there was like gossip inside of the church that I went to that was like,
there still is.
So-and-so's doing yoga, because like they thought yoga was a religion, and they thought it was like a satanic religion. It's like they're bowing and worshiping and practicing and chanting, and they have these motions and exercises, and they, you know,
it does feel very it's religion-y. It feels very ritualistic.
I mean, it's not. It's it's like stretching with meditation.
Yeah,
basically.
But if you go to full classic yoga, like it is deeply rooted in religion.
Not modern anymore. Not modern yoga. Modern yoga is more about like
westernized yoga, not modern yoga.
That's what I meant to say.
I would say tradition, like actual yogis would not consider fucking like core power and stuff like real yoga. They're like, oh, that's like Starbucks yoga.
Exactly.
Yeah. So like, yeah, there's benefits to everything. Again, like, I think that the reason why so many people gravitate towards these things is not because they're inherently bad or they want to be manipulated or anything. They're trying to find the answers to the universe, dude. Like, everyone's on this planet confused as shit. There's no fucking rule book of like what works, what doesn't work, what's right and what's wrong. You're just trying to figure it out. And I think it's very convenient for people when they start to find a lot of people that seem like they have the answers to just kind of like go along with it without questioning it. And even if you do start questioning it, like you said, you kind of got that like cognitive dissonance and stuff and cognitive bias where you start to just be like, oh, well, they just haven't found the truth yet. Oh, they're just asking these questions, or they're saying these things because they don't know. Like, I think about when I was in Bible school, like they would say that like the earth was like 6,000 years old. And I just was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then it's like, when you actually break it down, you're like, no, that doesn't make any sense at all. Like that seems ridiculous. That seems ridiculous.
Seems
like,
lunatic. And, you know, I think, kind of touching on the, you know, like thought of, oh, I just need to find a group of people that believe these things. I used to believe there was like, if be like, oh well, it's got to be true if 500 million people believe it, then it's got to be true. And it's like, just because a lot of people believe something to be true doesn't mean it's true. 66% of Americans believe that aliens have been here at Roswell. Does that mean it's true? No.
But it doesn't mean it's not true. But it doesn't mean it's true.
Agreed. But I'm saying, like, just because a lot of people, that's another logical fallacy. I forget what it's called. I think it's called appeal to authority or something along those lines, where it's like, or appeal to group. I forget the name of it.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But it's the idea.
It's like groupthink.
Groupthink, yeah. It's like, oh, a bunch of people believe this, then it must be true. It's like, oh, a bunch of people believe crystals to be true, must be true. Oh, a bunch of people believe the Earth is 6,000 years old, must be true.
Well, people also want to be part of a community, right? Like, I mean, I can see how it's very easy to fall into these paths, because as soon as you believe all these things that everyone believes, you're like a part of the thing, like it's very easy to, for example, I think about, some of the people that we met in like Venice Beach and stuff. It'd be very easy. Like, my friend David, for example, he's in like Tulum right now in like Mexico, like having like the coolest experiences right now. And I look at all of his friends and I'm like, oh, these guys are like straight up like freaking hippies that believe in like some weird shit. And I'm like, I would want to go on this trip with them. But at the same time, like, I don't know if I'd be fully like taken in and welcomed by all of them unless I started wearing like wooden beads and like chanting with them and doing like fucking Kundalini yoga with them and like all these weird
beach meditations
and like charging my crystals and fucking like who knows what else. Like, there's just all these things where there's all these little subcultures that you're not really a part of unless you go full force, kind of like, I even think about like different music scenes. Like you're not fully respected until you have like fucking gauged ears or like tattoos or you wear the right clothes, or everyone's got their little thing.
EDM scene, metal scene, hip hop scene.
I mean, even the church scene, dude. Like, you showed up to church wearing the wrong thing, you're like the other. You show up to the gym wearing jeans and flip flops, you're the other. Like, you always have to conform to a certain extent. And I think that's what people get very comfortable in, and they don't want to question it because it feels good to just be in a place where you're like, you feel like you're accepted, you feel like you understand the world. Because religion and all things like that, you're just trying to figure out the questions of the universe. And I think also, especially because I have a very similar story with Christianity and stuff, like grew up growing in church and all that, like it's very easy when you have these questions, there's always like a rebuttal to the question. It's like, why did this bad thing happen? Oh, God's testing you. Oh, why did this good thing happen? Oh, well, God's blessing you. It's like there's always a reason why things happen. Like, for example, you got hit by a car recently, and my brain, because those pathways have just been carved over the years.
Your automatic
years,
thought was,
I'm like, what did Richard do that God was like mad at him about? Like that was like where my brain went. But then also I'm like, oh, well, he's not a Christian anymore. He's like talking about this. But I also think about, what if Richard was still a Christian and was, going to church, blah, 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 and this thing happened. What pathways would I think then? I'm like, oh, dude, God always tests his best soldiers, dude. He never puts any. He never gives you anything that you can't. He never gives you anything that you can't deal with, bro. God's
got a plan for you, man. God's got a plan, dude. Gotta have faith.
There's always something good that's gonna come out of this, and God's got a plan for Richard, and He's really testing him, but He's gonna use this experience as a testimony, shit like that. And
that's how I thought my original accident was. I literally was like, I was on this quest to find out like how I could use my spinal cord injury as a way to like spread the message of God.
Yeah,
and
of course.
And like, and then the more and more I like searched, I was like, oh, I've got broken thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, it took a while, but like, I remember, I mean, I even read, like, a lot of like the Four Horsemen, like atheist books, like I read like God is Not Great. I read The God Delusion, I read some like books by Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and, Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens. And I was like, dude, I'm on these guys' teams. Like I believe everything. Yeah. And then I was like conflicted because I'm like, wait a minute, huh? I would watch, like Neil deGrasse Tyson like explain the universe, and I'm like, oh, I get it. Like, I understand this now. Like,
yeah, because also a lot of times
the Big Bang is a lie. God spoke, and then bang.
So you're just telling me that something this big blew up and created the whole universe, like stuff like that. And it's like, oh yeah, that does sound dumb. You're right, haha. Shit like that. And it's very easy to create arguments for any side of anything.
That's called a straw man argument, which you just did right there.
Yeah.
It's misrepresenting the other person's argument to make them seem dumber than they really are.
Yeah, exactly.
That is called another logical fallacy.
Yeah, exactly. And it's it's very easy to fall into.
Hope you enjoyed that clip. If you want the full episode, you can click right here. If you want to subscribe, click here. If you want more clips, we got 2 more right over here.